Your body has slowed down. The calendar is quieter than it has been in years. Fewer obligations, fewer places you have to be, and yet there is still something inside you that hurries through breakfast, through a quiet morning, through an afternoon that has nowhere left to go. Most people assume this hurry will disappear on its own once life slows down. It rarely does. The body retires. The mind does not get the memo. I have noticed this in my own life more than once, sitting in a moment with nothing demanding my attention and still feeling the urge to find something to do, as if stillness itself were a kind of failure. It took me a long time to ask why. This is not really about time anymore. Rushing was never only about getting things done. Often, it is about avoiding what shows up the moment you stop the silence, the questions about who you are now, the parts of life that no longer have an obvious next step. Buddhism has spent over 2,000 years studying exactly this kind of restlessness. Not the restlessness of busy people, but the restlessness of people who have nothing left to rush toward and still cannot sit still. In this talk, we are going to look at why that happens and what it actually takes to let your mind slow down the way your body already has. This is not about doing less. This is about understanding what the hurry was protecting you from all along. Teaching one busyness was never the same as meaning old age arrives and for the first time in decades the calendar empties. Most people expect relief. Instead, they feel restless. Most people spend 40-50 years building a simple equation in their heads. To be busy is to be valuable. The job, the meetings, the deadlines, the endless list of things that needed doing, all of it became proof that a day mattered. Nobody sat them down and explained this. It arrived quietly through every promotion that rewarded speed, every conversation that opened with, "How busy are you these days?" Every unspoken message that slowing down meant falling behind. You already know this feeling, the slight unease of an empty afternoon, the urge to find something, anything to fill it. Buddhism has a name for this dukkha, the friction that appears the moment life refuses to match what the mind expects of it. Here, the expectation is simple: a day is supposed to be full. When it isn't, something inside protests. This protest is not really about the empty afternoon. It is about what the empty afternoon seems to be saying, that you are no longer needed in the way you once were. People rarely say this out loud. They say something smaller instead. I should probably tidy the garage. I should call and check on the kids. I should do something useful with this time. Useful, always useful, as if simply existing in a quiet room were not enough of a reason to be there. This is conditioning, not character. For decades, the nervous system learned to associate stillness with danger, not physical danger, but a quieter kind, the danger of becoming irrelevant. Each time rest felt earned only after enough productivity, the mind reinforced the same lesson. Stillness equals risk. Movement equals safety. By the time old age arrives and the calendar finally empties on its own, that lesson does not simply switch off because the circumstances changed. The body slowed down. The wiring did not. This is not laziness showing up late in life. This is decades of training finally meeting an environment it was never built for. The Buddha taught that suffering rarely comes from circumstances alone. It comes from the gap between what is happening and what the mind insists should be happening instead. An empty afternoon is not inherently uncomfortable. It becomes uncomfortable only when a mind trained for 40 years of busyness measures it against an old, exhausted standard of worth. Look at how this plays out in ordinary moments. A retired person sits down to read and feels guilty within minutes. A grandparent visits and immediately starts cleaning a kitchen that does not need cleaning. A man who built a career around being needed spends his first free Tuesday rearranging a garage nobody asked him to touch. None of these tasks are necessary. They are not really about the garage or the kitchen or the book left unread. They are about proving, one more time, that the day was not wasted. There is an old teaching about exactly this kind of trap, the mind mistaking constant motion for a meaningful life, when in fact the two have very little to do with each other. A busy life and a meaningful life are not the same thing, even though most people spend years assuming they are. Busyness measures output. Meaning measures presence. A person can fill 60 years with motion and still feel near the end of it that very little of it actually touched them. Another person can spend a single quiet afternoon, fully present with a grandchild, fully present with their own breath, and walk away from it with something that no spreadsheet of accomplishments ever gave them. Imagine a friend came to you and said they felt guilty for resting after 50 years of work. Would you tell them they had not earned it yet? Of course not. You would tell them the opposite, that rest was overdue, that the worth was never really in question. Yet that is exactly the conversation many people refuse to have with themselves. The Buddha never taught that effort is the enemy. He taught that effort without awareness becomes its own kind of suffering motion, for the sake of motion, busyness mistaken for purpose. This is not an argument against doing things. It is an argument against doing things only to avoid the discomfort of an unfilled hour. The practice that comes from this is small, almost embarrassingly small. Sit in the empty hour without rushing to fill it, and simply notice what comes up, not to fix it, just to notice it. Most people who try this for the first time discover the same thing. The discomfort fades faster than expected. What replaces it is not emptiness, but something closer to relief, the same relief a person feels when they finally set down a bag they had been carrying so long they forgot it had weight. The calendar emptied. That was never the problem. The real question was always whether you would let your sense of worth empty along with it, or finally separate the two for good. Teaching 2. The hurry is not about time. Old age brings something most people never prepared for: silence. And the mind reacts to that silence like an alarm going off. For most of life, silence was rare. Mornings were full of obligations, commutes, calls, errands, deadlines. Even quiet weekends had structured chores, plans, somewhere to be by evening. Silence, when it appeared, was brief, a pause between tasks, never a permanent condition. Then old age changes the architecture of a day. The children are grown, the career has ended, the phone rings less, and the silence that used to last 10 minutes now lasts most of an afternoon. Many people respond to that silence by reaching for something to do, a chore, a call, a task that didn't exist 5 minutes earlier. There's a word in the old teachings for exactly this reflex: the second arrow. The first arrow is the silence itself, simply a fact of changed circumstances. The second arrow is everything the mind throws at that silence afterward: the discomfort, the urgency, the sudden need to move. The first arrow rarely hurts as much as people assume. It is the second arrow that does the actual damage. This is not a flaw in character. Nobody sits a person down at 25 and teaches them how to be alone with an empty afternoon. Most people spend their whole lives surrounded by noise without ever noticing it was noise. The mind never had to learn stillness because stillness never had room to arrive. So when silence finally does arrive, the nervous system reads it as something close to danger, not the danger of a predator, but the danger of irrelevance, of being left alone with thoughts that were always there but never had space to surface. The body responds the only way it knows how. It manufactures a task. It reaches for the phone, anything that interrupts the silence before the silence can ask its real question. This is not about being unable to relax. This is the nervous system doing exactly what decades of noise trained it to do. There is a story from the Zen tradition about two monks traveling together, an older one and a younger one. They came to a river where a woman stood unable to cross because of the current. Without a word, the older monk lifted her onto his back, carried her across and set her down on the other side. They continued walking. Hours later, the younger monk could no longer contain himself. "We are not supposed to touch women," he said. "How could you carry her like that?" The older monk replied, "I set her down by the river. You are still carrying her. You are still carrying her." Many people in old age are carrying something the same way, not a woman across a river, but a version of themselves that finished its job long ago. The provider who is no longer needed to provide. The caretaker whose children no longer need caretaking. The role finished. But the mind kept carrying it long after there was anywhere left to set it down. Buddhism doesn't ask you to forget who you were. It asks a harder question: why are you still carrying a role the world already let go of? Look at how this shows up. Someone keeps the company phone forwarding to their cell, though no one from the company calls anymore. Someone cooks enough food for a family of 5 that left the house 15 years ago. Someone wakes at 6 a.m. for a job that ended a decade ago, lying in bed afterward with nothing to get up for, refusing to admit the alarm no longer means anything. The early texts describe this same pattern in monks who left monastic life, soldiers who left war, parents whose children grew and left. The role ends. The habit of carrying it does not end at the same time. The Buddha taught that clinging to an identity, even a good one, even a loving one, eventually becomes its own form of suffering, because every identity is temporary and the mind insists on treating it as permanent. This does not mean the role didn't matter. It does not mean the love behind it wasn't real. It means the role was never meant to be carried forever, only carried for as long as it served, and set down once it didn't. The practice here is small. Notice what you are still carrying that already reached the other side of the river, not to throw it away violently, just to notice it and ask whether your hands are still full for a reason or simply out of habit. The silence was never the enemy. It was only waiting for you to finally set something down. Teaching 3: Grieving the role, not the youth. One of the strangest griefs of old age has nothing to do with youth at all. People assume that what they miss when they miss being younger is youth itself, the energy, the unlined face, the body that recovered quickly. But sit with someone in this kind of grief for long enough, and a different story usually surfaces. They are not mourning a faster heartbeat or smoother skin. They are mourning the version of themselves the world used to need. You can hear this in the way people describe what they lost. They rarely say, "I miss being 25. They say, "I miss being useful. I miss when people called and needed something from me. I miss being the one everyone relied on." Buddhism has a word for what's happening underneath these sentences: upadana, the act of holding on past the point where holding on still serves you. Most people think of attachment as something attached to objects, money, a house, a relationship. But people can attach just as tightly to an identity. The provider, the one who fixes things, the one whose phone never stopped ringing. For decades, that identity earned attention, respect, a sense of being central to someone else's life. It was not a small thing to build. It is not a small thing to lose. Here is what actually happens mechanically inside a person going through this. The role didn't just give them tasks to do. It gave their nervous system a steady, predictable source of validation being needed, registered neurologically as safety. When the role fades, that supply disappears, but the need for it does not disappear with it. The mind keeps reaching for the same source of safety, finds nothing there, and reads the absence as a kind of danger. That danger gets felt as grief, but it is grief for a function, not for a self. This is not the loss of who you are. It is the loss of who you thought you had to be. There is an old observation, older than any modern theory of identity, that points to exactly this confusion. People mistake the costume for the person wearing it. When the costume provider, caretaker, the one in charge, comes off because the world no longer requires it, the person underneath assumes they have disappeared along with it. Watch how this plays out. A father who spent 30 years being asked for advice notices his grown children stop asking and feels a grief he cannot name. A woman who spent decades being the one who held the family together notices the family holding together fine without her constant effort and feels strangely hollow about it instead of relieved. A man retires from a job where people once needed his signature on everything, and within a month feels less like himself than he has in years, not because the job was his joy, but because the job was without his noticing his proof that he existed. Buddhism doesn't ask you to stop caring about being useful or stop valuing the years you spent providing for others. It asks a more specific question: is there a version of you that exists even when nobody needs anything from you? If the honest answer is no, that is not a character flaw. It is simply a sign of where the next work needs to happen. This is not about becoming someone who needs nothing from anyone. It is about discovering that you were never only the role in the first place. The practice that comes from this is uncomfortable but simple in a quiet moment. Ask what remains of you when every role is subtracted. Not provider, not caretaker, not the one people call first. Most people sit with that question for a long time before anything answers back. That silence is not failure. It is the beginning of meeting the part of you the role was never able to show. The Buddha taught that nothing built on impermanent conditions can hold a person's peace for long because the conditions by nature change. Roles end. Bodies age. People stop calling. None of that is a personal failure. It is simply what conditions do. What survives all of it is not the role, but the awareness that was watching the role the entire time. You are not grieving your youth. You are grieving a version of yourself the world has stopped asking for. And underneath that, grief quietly, is someone the world never had to ask for at all. Teaching 4. Movement. Without the burden of rushing old age does not remove responsibility. It changes how much pressure a person can carry while holding it. There are still grandchildren to pick up, a spouse to care for, a house that needs maintaining, decisions that need making. None of that disappears just because the body slowed down. What disappears is the ability to carry all of it the way you once did, at speed, on adrenaline, powered by a kind of urgency that used to feel like competence. Most people respond to that mismatch in one of two ways. Some try to keep moving at the old pace and exhaust themselves doing it. Others stop almost entirely, afraid that any effort at all will cost more than it's worth. Buddhism has a name for the space between these two extremes. The middle way, not a compromise, but a recognition that both extremes create their own kind of suffering. This is not about choosing moderation because moderation sounds wise. It is about noticing what actually happens at each extreme. The person who refuses to slow down burns out the body that was already asking for rest. The person who withdraws completely loses the muscle, the connection, the sense of purpose that came from staying engaged. Neither extreme protects anyone. Both extremes simply trade one kind of suffering for another. There is a more useful distinction hiding underneath all of this, and it has nothing to do with how much a person does. It has to do with where the effort is coming from. Movement that comes from the present moment feels entirely different in the body than movement that comes from rushing, even when from the outside the two look identical. Rushing pulls attention into the future before the task is finished. The hands are washing a dish, while the mind is already 3 tasks ahead, bracing for what hasn't happened yet. Movement, by contrast, stays where the hands are. The dish gets washed. Nothing else is happening at the same time because nothing else needs to be. This is not a small difference. This is the difference between a body that recovers from its day and a body that never actually rests, even during rest. The Buddha called this distinction right effort, not effort measured by how much gets done, but effort measured by whether it can be sustained without anxiety underneath it. Right effort does what needs doing. It does not demand to be doing more than that. The same distinction applies to caring for the people who still depend on you. Caring comes from love and responds to what is actually happening. Worrying comes from fear and responds to what might happen, has not happened, and may never happen at all. One brings steadiness to a relationship. The other quietly drains both people in it, the one worrying and the one who can feel themselves being worried about. There is a story told about a student who came to his teacher frustrated with how slowly his practice was progressing. "If I work twice as hard," he asked, "how long until I reach awakening?" The teacher thought for a moment. 20 years, he said. The student, confused, pushed further. "But what if I work 3 times as hard? What if I give everything I have to it day and night?" The teacher answered without hesitation. "Then 30 years. Effort aimed at forcing an outcome moves slower than effort aimed simply at doing the next right thing." This is an old pattern that shows up everywhere. Pressure gets mistaken for progress. The early texts are full of students who pushed harder and arrived later precisely because the pushing itself became the obstacle. Picture this in an ordinary week. A walk taken to arrive somewhere 5 minutes faster instead of to feel the legs moving and the air on the skin. A conversation with a grandchild spent mentally rehearsing the next 5 things on a list instead of actually listening to what the child is saying. A meal eaten in 4 minutes, standing at the counter instead of sitting down to taste it. None of these require less responsibility. They require a different relationship with the responsibility that is already there. The Buddha never taught that you should set down your responsibilities. He taught that you could carry them without carrying urgency on top of them, that the weight of a duty and the weight of dread about that duty are 2 separate weights, and only one of them is actually necessary. You are still needed. You still have things to do. The only real choice left is whether you do them at the pace of fear or at the pace of your own breath. Teaching 5. The rhythm nature never rushes. Old age slows the body down, whether a person cooperates with it or not. Joints take longer to loosen in the morning. Recovery after a long day takes longer than it used to. A short walk that once required no thought now asks for a little more care, a little more attention to the ground underfoot. None of this is a malfunction. It is simply what happens to every body that has been running for 70, 80, 90 years. Most people interpret this slowing as something to fight, something to apologize for, something close to failure. There is a different way to see it, and it comes from looking at almost anything else alive. Trees do not panic when their leaves fall. Rivers do not resist the pull toward the sea. Buddhism has a word for the law governing all of this. Anicca, the simple fact that everything changes exactly when it is meant to on its own timeline, without permission from anyone. A body slowing down at 80 is not breaking a rule. It is following the same rule every living thing follows. The mistake is not the slowing. The mistake is expecting a body at 80 to perform like a body at 30 and then treating the gap between expectation and reality as a personal defeat. This is not decline in the way most people use that word. This is the body simply telling the truth about its own age, finally, after years of being asked to pretend otherwise. Here is what is actually happening underneath the fatigue. Recovery takes longer because cells repair more slowly. Balance takes more attention because the nervous system processes signals with slightly more delay. Sleep becomes lighter because the body no longer needs the same depth of repair it once did. None of these are signs of a body failing at its job. They are signs of a body doing exactly what bodies at this stage are supposed to do. The Buddha taught that resisting what cannot be changed is one of the most reliable ways to manufacture suffering that did not need to exist. The body will age, regardless of how hard the mind argues against it. The only real choice is whether the years ahead are spent fighting that fact or working alongside it. There is an old teaching that compares an undisciplined relationship with the body to walking against a current that never tires. The current does not need to be defeated, it only needs to be moved with. This is not giving up on strength or health. This is giving up on the specific kind of strength that only younger bodies can offer in order to build a kind of strength this stage of life can actually support. The body's request for rest, then, is not a complaint. It is closer to an invitation toward a pace that was always more natural than the one most people spent decades forcing themselves to keep. That invitation looks small in practice. Eating a meal slowly enough to actually taste it, instead of finishing it while thinking about the next task. Walking without headphones, paying attention to the ground, the air, the sound of footsteps instead of filling the silence with something else. Spending time outdoors without a phone in hand, simply watching what light does to a tree over 20 minutes. Letting a morning start without checking the news first. So the mind has a few unhurried minutes before the world starts asking for its attention. None of these require effort in the usual sense. They require permission to stop treating a slower pace as a problem to fix. Buddhism doesn't ask anyone to withdraw from the world to find this kind of peace. It asks for something much smaller, a willingness to notice the mind itself, the way it jumps, grasps, hurries before it has even decided to. Buddhism has a word for that: watching mind two-sitter, the part of you that observes the rushing without being the rushing itself. A slower life is not an empty one. It is simply the first life in decades with enough room in it for you to actually notice you are living it. Teaching 6. What stays with people is not what you did. There is a question almost nobody asks in old age. What do you want to leave behind? Not in money, but in presence. Most people spend decades planning for the first kind of legacy: a will, an inheritance, a house divided fairly among children. These things matter, and nobody is suggesting otherwise. But ask someone to describe a parent or grandparent who has passed, and notice what actually comes out of their mouth first. It is rarely a number. It is almost always a feeling, the way a room felt calmer when that person walked into it. The way an argument lost its edge once they sat down at the table. The way a single steady voice on the phone could undo an entire bad week. People remember atmosphere, not accomplishment. There's an old teaching about exactly this kind of influence: interdependence. The simple fact that no person exists in isolation, and that one person's inner state quietly shapes the state of everyone near them. A calm person changes a room without saying a word. An anxious person changes it just as much, also without saying a word. This means something specific for someone now living through the years. This script has been describing the slower pace, the quieter calendar, the role that used to define a day. None of that disqualifies a person from mattering. It relocates where the mattering happens. It moves from what gets produced to what gets transmitted. Children today, including grown ones with children of their own, are absorbing an enormous amount of pressure. Pressure to perform, to keep up, to never appear to be falling behind. Most of them have very few examples in their lives of a person who is simply at peace without having to prove anything. A grandparent, a parent, an older relative who has stopped competing with time and is no longer afraid of an empty afternoon. That is not a small thing to witness. It is, for a stressed nervous system watching it, one of the only proofs available that a different way of living is actually possible. This is not about doing less. This is about finally being something the world needs in a form most people never get the chance to offer. The Buddha taught a practice called metta, often translated as loving kindness, and one detail about it surprises people the first time they hear it. It begins with the self, not with others. The reasoning is simple, almost mechanical. A person cannot offer calm they do not have. A person cannot model peace they have not practiced toward their own mind first. This is not selfish, despite how it sounds at first. Buddhism doesn't ask you to take care of yourself instead of others. It asks you to take care of yourself so there is something steady left to offer them. There is an old observation that runs through almost every tradition that takes the mind seriously. People teach far more by what they are than by what they say. A grandfather who tells a grandchild to relax while visibly tense teaches tension. A grandmother who says nothing about peace, but who clearly has it, teaches peace more effectively than any conversation could. Picture the difference. A child watching a grandparent rush through a Sunday, glancing at a clock every few minutes, learns that adulthood means perpetual hurry. A child watching a grandparent sit through an entire afternoon without needing anything to happen learns that stillness is survivable, even enjoyable. A child watching an older relative receive disappointing news and stay steady learns more about resilience in that single moment than from 100 lectures on the subject. None of this requires wisdom delivered as advice. The advice, in fact, usually lands worse than the example. What lands is simply being near someone who is not afraid of their own life. The practice that follows from all this is not complicated. Treat your own peace as something worth tending, not because it earns anything, but because it is quietly the only inheritance that cannot be spent or lost. Nobody will remember exactly how busy you were. Somebody somewhere will remember exactly how it felt to sit in a room with you when you had finally stopped rushing. Your body already knows how to do this. It has been asking for a slower rhythm for a while now, in the joints that take longer to loosen, in the afternoons that no longer fill themselves on their own. The only part of you that hasn't caught up yet is the part that still hurries through breakfast, still reaches for a task the moment a room goes quiet. This season is not asking less of you. It is asking something different, not speed but depth. Not more hours filled, but more of the hours you already have actually lived, instead of rushed past. Old age was never the threat. The threat was carrying a pace that nothing in your life still requires. If this gave you something to sit with today, consider staying around. There's a small space here for people learning to live at a slower, steadier rhythm. Subscribing simply means you'll be part of it. And if there's one place in your day where the hurry still shows up without your permission, a meal, a walk, a quiet room, leave it in the comments. Naming it tends to be the first step in loosening it. If there's someone in your life still rushing through a life that has already slowed down, a parent, a sibling, a friend who can't seem to sit still in their own quiet, this might be exactly what they need to hear today. Share it with them.